The Lord of the Rings, a roadmap for the modern times. In the 21st century, it seems that so many things are happening at the same time that one needs an anchor to hold on to. News of terrorism, climate change, moral degradation, and the like seem to bombard the media. Where does one find solace in the midst of such bleak news? One cannot help but call to mind J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings during times like this. Published after the World War II and considered a fantasy, it still rings true even or more especially during our times. It may have spoken of creatures and beings that do not exist in our world, but it is largely symptomatic of the world we live in, both then and now. A number of articles have been written that speaks of issues in the modern world that the novel addresses, ranging from environmental issue, technology, addiction, power and its stronghold, and so on and so forth. Tolkien, however, has spoken of his distaste for the treatment of his book like an allegory. He especially does not advocate reading his novel for a one-to-one correlation, drawing symbolisms from certain characters or situations. Yet he did speak of applicability, which is what this paper is about. In his foreword to the second edition, he wrote, I quote, I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purpose domination of the author. End of quote. What can the Lord of the Rings offer the 21st century individual as a roadmap for the modern times? I have drawn up 5 key essentials from the novel that allowed the mission to triumph. These are: first, the power of the small, or how humility alone can withstand greed. Second, the gift of fellowship, or how one can reach the end only with the help of others. Third, the wisdom of Gandalf, how wisdom from a sage or prophet is essential to one's journey. Fourth, knowing one's mission, or how knowing one's mission can help one stay on the path. And fifth, possessing the Lothlorien within, or how inner strength and inspiration can sustain one's journey. Perhaps these 5 key essentials can offer the modern man a sense of compass on how to navigate today's troubling times in pursuit of his own calling or mission. First key essential: the power of the small. In the vast landscape of The Lord of the Rings, even in the length of the book itself, nothing is more emphasized than the imposing doom of the enemy, as well as the smallness of its hero or one of its heroes. In this light, Frodo seems like an unlikely choice to be the ring bearer, considering how powerless he is compared to the enemy. Human logic will point to Gandalf, Aragorn, or Lady Galadriel to be more worthy bearers of the ring, and yet he is the right choice because wisdom reveals that it is only with the power of the small that the might of greed can be overcome. Frodo is powerless, weak, and flawed. This sounds like a recipe for disaster. Yet, what may not be clearly evident is how this liability can actually be turned into an asset for the mission. Frodo may be small, but he is large in humility. If the ring fell into the hands of someone powerful, she or he may not be able to resist wielding the ring and using it for his or her own agenda. They know how powerful they can be, and the offer of limitless power for the sake of good can be very tempting indeed. This is why Gandalf recoils when Frodo offers him the ring, saying, I quote, Do not tempt me, end of quote, because he is aware of his limitations of what he can or cannot do. Frodo, in his naivete, also offers the ring to Lady Galadriel, who seems to be tempted for a while, but eventually and expectedly chose the right thing to do, which is to resist the ring. Hence, she diminishes and says, I quote, I passed the test, end of quote. It is only Frodo who can bear the ring because of his utter innocence, simplicity, and humility. He can be trusted not to be swayed by temptations of power because he is aware of his smallness. His humility will allow him to focus on his mission alone rather than on his grand designs of saving the world. Toward the end of the mission, he may have failed because he did give in to the temptation of putting on the ring and claiming it for himself. Yet the ring will not have gone that far if it were not in his hands. Sam, on the other hand, passes the test of the ring with flying colors, which also proves why he is the best companion for Frodo's lonely journey. When Frodo was held captive by the orcs in the Tower of Cirith Ungol, Sam was left to become the ring bearer. Just like others before him, he was tempted to own the ring and imagine big dreams awaiting him. Yet it was his sense of smallness that won in his inner battle. The gift of contentment jolts him back to the reality that his happiness consists of a small plot of land, I quote, "The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm, his own hands to use, not the hands of others to command." End of quote. Frodo's smallness is also essential for him as a ring bearer because he is teachable. He grows into his role as a ring bearer. He may have been afraid at the beginning and certainly had his own share of mistakes, yet he learns his lessons along the way, and one of the valuable lessons he learns is that of mercy. At the start of the novel, he wants Gollum killed, yet toward the end of the journey, Gandalf's words of wisdom have made a dent on him. He realized that Gandalf is right. Gollum may have had to play in yet in fulfilling the mission. True enough, when he spares the life of Gollum, Frodo reaps the fruits of his mercy when Gollum becomes the means by which the mission would triumph. This shows how one is called to fulfill a mission. One may at first feel inadequate and unequal to the task at hand. Yet it is usually the case that one is called not because of ability, but availability. One grows into the person that one should become in fulfilling the mission. It is in a sense twofold. We are called to fulfill a mission, but the mission in turn also fulfills and grows us. In the end, it is the farewell gift that Sam receives from the Lady Galadriel in Lothlorien that becomes a powerful lesson on how one should never underestimate small things. When the lady bestowed her gift on Sam, she said, I quote, "For you, little gardener and lover of trees, I have only a small gift." End of quote. She explained, I quote, "In this box there is earth from my orchard, and such blessing as Galadriel has still to bestow it is upon it. It will not keep you on your road, nor defend you against any peril, but if you keep it and see your home again at last, then perhaps it may reward you. Though you shall find all barren and laid waste, there will be few gardens in Middle-earth that will bloom like your garden, if you sprinkle this earth there." End of quote. Indeed, after their mission is fulfilled, Sam goes back to the Shire and finds the hand of the enemy at work, destroying what was once a peaceful and orderly home. He remembers the gift of the lady and brings it out. Not only does he find a fine dust for the earth, but also a small seed. When he plants the seed, it eventually grows into a splendid tree. I quote, "It was indeed a malorn, and it was the wonder of the neighborhood. And after years, as it grew in grace and beauty, it was known far and wide, and people would come long journeys to see it. The only malorn west of the mountains and east of the sea, and one of the finest in the world." End of quote. It is the same also with Frodo. When he started out, he was just a small seed, laughable in the face of the might of the enemy. It was an impossible and seemingly unthinkable match. But as David overthrew Goliath, I quote, "There is also a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest and most timid hobbit, waiting for some final and desperate danger to make it grow." End of quote. In the end, it was through two lowly hobbits, Frodo and Sam, that the Middle-earth has been spared from the evil of Sauron. The second essential, the gift of fellowship. Even if Frodo was determined in spite of his fear to go alone, he would not have been able to finish his mission by himself. The burden of the ring was too heavy for anyone to carry alone. At the start of his journey, Gandalf was not around as promised, and that already made it too difficult for Frodo to go forward. But what helped him in the initial part of his journey was the presence of his hobbit friends, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. When they arrived at the house that they prepared for him, Frodo was spared the agony of having to part with his friends when they revealed that they knew about the ring from the start. What relief and joy it gave to Frodo to know that he was not alone in his journey. This same relief can be heard from Frodo toward the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, when he decided that he would take the ring to the end by himself. But Sam discovered that he was trying to escape and intercepted his plan. Knowing that Sam was with him gave Frodo the courage and the strength to go on. I quote, "So all my plan is spoiled," said Frodo. "It is no good trying to escape you. But I am glad, Sam. I cannot tell you how glad. Come along. It is plain that we were meant to go together." End of quote. When the Council of Elrond convened, Elrond named the 9 members of the company who will journey together. He explained, "The company of the ring shall be 9, and the 9 walkers shall be set against the 9 riders that are evil." End of quote. The members of the company include Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, Pippin, Sam, and Frodo. Gandalf, as the wizard, was sent to be their guide. Aragorn and Boromir represented men, while Legolas was chosen to represent the elves, and Gimli the dwarves. The rest were hobbits to complete the fellowship. The diversity of the members proved to be important because the journey would later on reveal how the strength or skill of each member would be called upon to help them in their journey. Even after the fellowship broke up and only Sam remained with Frodo, it was as if Sam carried with him the entire company. He represented the company. In the dark hour when Frodo needed him, Sam came through. The company was not without its trials and betrayals. At the beginning, there was tension and seeming hostility between Legolas and Gimli, but later on, after their trip to Lothlorien, these longtime enemies became very good friends. Boromir, on the other hand, has failed the test in trying to get the ring from Frodo, but even this has been used for good, because it only revealed more clearly to Frodo the next step he should take after that critical juncture. In spite of his lusting for the ring, Boromir died nobly, defending the hobbits and confessing to Aragorn his crime. Being a member of the company is no easy task, because there is the constant temptation that hovers not only for the ring bearer, but also for the rest of the company, as Gandalf acknowledged. The fellowship formed is truly a curious, if not a necessary group to accompany the ring bearer. It carried the strongest and the weakest members, the proud and humble ones, the wise and the foolish. Gandalf, for instance, has the wisdom, authority, and power to overthrow Saruman, especially after he came from the dead as Gandalf the White. But on the other hand, there is Pippin, who is like a child, prone to making mistakes out of his curiosity. The incident with the Palantir is evidence of how his carelessness could have endangered the entire company. Yet, while Gandalf could have been harsh with him for exposing himself and possibly the whereabouts of Frodo to Sauron, he was quick to forgive him instead. Gandalf even acknowledged the good that came out of Pippin's foolish move. He told Aragorn, I quote, "Maybe I have been saved by this hobbit from a grave blunder. I had considered whether or not to probe this stone myself to find its uses. Had I done so, I should have been revealed to him myself. I am not ready for such a trial, if indeed I shall ever be so." End of quote. For all their differences, the company is bound together by their love for each other. When they had to pass through the paths of the dead, Gimli and Legolas both avow that they went through it simply because of Aragorn. Gimli said, I quote, "For upon that road I was put to shame." Gimli, Gloin's son, who had deemed himself more tough than men and hardier under earth than any elf. But neither did I approve, and I was held to the road only by the will of Aragorn. End of quote. I quote, "And by the love of him also," said Legolas, "for all those who come to know him come to love him after his own fashion." End of quote. The strength of this love and friendship was also shown in the way the company spoke to each other openly and on equal terms, regardless of the status of each member. The camaraderie of the fellowship is also palpable whenever they got together. They would jab at each other endearingly and with good humor, as evidence of how intimate this friendship is. For instance, after their relentless search for them, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn finally found Merry and Pippin, who were smoking a pipe after having a hearty meal. But instead of greeting them, Merry took pains to show courtesy to King Theoden of the Mark, who were with Gimli and company, as instructed by Treebeard. Gimli could not help but burst out, I quote, "And what about your companions? What about Legolas and me? You rascals, you woolly-footed and wool-pated truants, a fine hunt you have led us, 200 leagues through fen and forest, battle and death, to rescue you, and here we find you feasting and idling, and smoking, smoking! Where did you come by weed, you villains? Hammer and tongs! I'm so torn between rage and joy that if I do not burst, it will be a marvel." End of quote. Sometimes it is this level of comfort that they have with one another that gives them a breather in their journey. It is the ability to find humor in situations and to laugh about it together that heartens one's soul. For instance, when Frodo and Sam were on their mission and were stopped by the Black Gate of Mordor, they went into hiding. Frodo at that time felt pressured because he had to make the next decision with no one around to guide him. Yet in the midst of the tension, Sam's innocent recollection of a childhood tale or rhyme put Frodo back on track. I quote, "Frodo had laughed in the midst of all his cares when Sam trotted out the old fireside rhyme of Oliphant, and the laugh had released him from hesitation." End of quote. At that point he knew what to do. One journey One's journey is bearable when there are friends who will accompany you, people who can entrust your heart to, and people who understand what your mission is will help you get there. They may not always be perfect, as in the case of Boromir or Pippin, but they can provide you with the relief or breather you need to be recharged. And when you are weary in your journey and feel like you cannot take one more step further, this necessary fellowship will be the one to carry you forward, sometimes even literally. The wisdom of Gandalf, the third key essential. Belief in oneself and the support of friends are not enough to help one accomplish one's mission. Here is when Gandalf's wisdom can become a crucial ingredient in helping one stay on the right path. There are moments in one's life when it is impossible to see the way using one's own eyes. It would be helpful if another pair of eyes were to look in and help provide perspective and guidance. But this additional pair of eyes cannot just belong to anybody, but only to a wise man. Throughout The Lord of the Rings, it was shown how the counsel of the wizard Gandalf has shed light in dark moments. It was through Gandalf's intervention that the enemy's ring has been revealed. Because of his investigation and discernment, he has discovered that the ring of Bilbo is actually the one ring that Sauron has been looking for all this time. It is also Gandalf who recognized Frodo as the rightful ring bearer, who alone carry it to the cracks of doom to destroy it. True wisdom allows for humility and smallness. In his greatness, Gandalf recognized that the smallness of Frodo is not a hindrance in carrying out the mission, but the necessary ingredient for the mission to be fulfilled. While Gandalf has long been a visitor of the Shire and has been vocal about his admiration for the hobbits, Sauron and Saruman, on the other hand, have looked down on their smallness. When Pippin gave in to the temptation to look at the Palantir, the enemy spoke such harsh words to him, stripping him of his dignity. It was only Gandalf, through his forgiveness, who helped restore Pippin back to his own self. The so-called smallness of the hobbits is one of the reasons why the Shire was not the focus of Sauron when he was looking for his ring. He underestimated small things and did not consider them as a threat. His lust for power is also another reason why Frodo is able to succeed in his mission. He thought that others were like him, hungry for power and looking for ways on how to use the ring to overthrow him. It never entered the sphere of his imagination that someone as small as a hobbit would think of destroying it in his own territory. That was his undoing. Gandalf, on the other hand, rose to greatness because of his humility and self-sacrifice. He would go around in tattered clothes, looking very much like an old and weary traveler. He used to be called Gandalf the Grey, but in Moria his strength and mettle were tested. He was faced with a Balrog, who seemed to be more than his match. Yet in that moment, in his seeming defeat, his courage and wisdom shone through. Bidding the others to go ahead, he fell to the abyss and his seeming death, giving up his life so others may live. This sacrifice was rewarded by his transfiguration, or even resurrection. He later on appeared to Gimli, Legolas, Aragorn, who were scared because he looked every inch like Saruman the White, who was no longer white. But when he took off his cloak, that is when he revealed himself in shining glory. Gandalf the Grey has become Gandalf the White, or as he said, he became what Saruman should be. As Gandalf the White, he stood even taller and more formidable than before, able to bring King Theoden out of darkness and putting Saruman in his place. Yet even in his greatness, he knows how to recognize one greater than he. When he handed over the Palantir to its rightful owner, which is Aragorn, the future king, he bowed down respectfully. In true wisdom lies humility. Yet for all his greatness, Gandalf was not unreachable. On the contrary, he was very much present, relatable, and accessible to the smallest one of them. He may not have been physically present in some parts of the journey, but when he was, they could talk to him like he was one of their own. Even the hobbits found friendship with him and considered him one of their own. He was someone one could confide in and yet find guidance when necessary. Gandalf was always on the side of truth and never yielded to evil. When he was at the gates of Mordor, he was met by a messenger of the Dark Lord who offered to return the hobbits in exchange for withdrawing from the fight against Sauron. Even then, Gandalf did not hesitate to choose the right path, which is to reject the terms of Sauron at all costs, even if that path did not seem to yield a good end in sight. The truth that Gandalf fought for was what Frodo needed throughout his journey, when so many forces of darkness have penetrated otherwise peaceful and innocent areas. In his journey to the end, Gandalf was in fact rarely present, but it was his words that brought Frodo direction, such as his words of warning never to use the ring, or how Strider is a friend and not a foe, or how mercy should rule in his dealings with Gollum, who eventually had a part to play in the success of the mission in spite of himself. Gandalf's wisdom was the staff that Frodo held on to as a reminder that one should only follow the path where truth and light reign supreme. The fourth key essential, knowing one's mission. When one is in the thick of one's journey, there are sometimes brambles along the way and a lot of dark patches. At the start of one's journey, it is easy to march on with a heart full of resolve and energy. Yet, when one encounters one trial after another, it can be tempting to give up and go back to the comfort of one's home, away from all the dangers. But when one's mission requires one to journey from dark to dark and from danger to danger, how can one make that daily decision and commitment to go forward? In the case of Frodo, what helped him stay true to his path was his unmistakable certainty of what he had to do. Frodo was able to discern the path he was supposed to take with the aid of Gandalf's counsel. While he knew it since day one, it was during the Council of Elrond when he was able to galvanize his resolve and proclaim his mission before the rest in the council. He was very much frightened and did not want to say what he feared. Yet he knew the course he should take as the ring bearer. At that point he knew that it was no mere chance or coincidence that the ring fell on him. It was his task to see it to the end. At certain points he may have offered the ring to Gandalf and to Lady Galadriel, but otherwise it was clear to him that his mission was to guard the ring and bring it to destruction. At the crucial juncture, toward the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, he asked to be given time to think it over for himself. What that time alone revealed was that he knew all along what he had to do, but he was scared to do it. This was the same with Master Samwise. He could read his master's mind that he knew clearly what to do and just needed a push to do it. It is this resolve that eventually led Frodo all the way to the end, even allowing Gollum to be their guide, if only it would mean reaching the place that nobody else knew. It was the knowledge of this mission that ultimately helped him stay on the path. During those moments when his vision or judgment may have been clouded, it was his knowledge of the mission that guided him to the center, to the one true mission that he had to fulfill. He may have failed in the end, as mentioned earlier, but the knowledge of the mission brought him that far in his journey. In the same way, what helps one fulfill one's mission is a certain knowledge of what that mission is in the first place. Sometimes discerning and accepting this mission takes a process, which is what happened with Frodo. His certainty of what his mission was grew over time until it became a firm and steely resolve that he could fall back on when he was too weak and weary already. But once one is certain about his or her mission, the rest will fall into place. No amount of obstacle, be it Sauron or the Mountain of Fire, can overcome the burning certainty of what one is meant to accomplish. It is in fact the knowledge of one's mission that enables one to cross the shadows in order to reach the light. Be like Frodo and Sam, who, I quote, stood there like man on the edge of a sleep where nightmare lurks, holding it off, though they know that they can only come to morning through the shadows. End of quote. The fifth key essential, possessing the Lothlorien within. After Gandalf fell into the abyss in Moria, the company was inconsolable with grief, but it was in their moment of darkness that the light came shining through. Throughout their journey in the Fellowship of the Ring, they would be given respite after harrowing encounters, such as meeting Tom Bombadil after the struggle with the Old Forest, or finding refuge in Rivendell after the wild chase that followed with the Black Riders. Yet the most trying circumstance they would face in the first phase of their journey is losing Gandalf, who has been their leader and counsel. Nothing could possibly console them, save for what seems to be a magical realm inhabited by elves, which is Lothlorien. In it was a lady of unspeakable and exquisite beauty, Lady Galadriel. Gimli would later on bemoan the farewell to Lothlorien and acknowledge that this would be the greatest grief he would carry in his journey henceforth. In the terrible aftermath of Gandalf's passing, only one thing could heal them of their weariness and grief: Lothlorien. Gandalf himself would ask to be brought to Lothlorien after he resurrected from the dead for healing and recovery. After going to Lothlorien, the journey would prove to be difficult yet not impossible. The gifts offered by the Lady Galadriel and the elves would sustain them for the rest of their journey. One of these gifts is the waybread, or what the elves called the lembas. This was a type of food that was, I quote, mostly in the form of very thin cakes made of a meal that was baked a light brown on the outside, and inside was the color of cream, end of quote. The elves instructed the company to, I quote, eat little at a time and only at need. For these things are given to serve them when all else fails. The cakes will keep sweet for many, many days if they are unbroken and left in their leaf wrappings, as the elves have brought them. One will keep a traveler on his feet for a day of long labor, even if he be one of the tall men of Minas Tirith. End of quote. When Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli searched for Merry and Pippin for miles on end on foot, it was the lembas that sustained them. I quote, often in their hearts they thanked the Lady of Lorien for the gift of lembas, for they could eat of it and find new strength even as they ran. End of quote. Merry and Pippin, as they were escaping from the orcs, also drew their strength from the lembas. Merry declared, I quote, lembas does put heart into you, a more wholesome sort of feeling too than the heat of that orc draught. End of quote. Not only were the gifts essential in providing inner strength and inspiration to the members of the fellowship, even the name of the Lady Galadriel was powerful enough to fight against forces of evil. Even in simple times of need, just an utterance of the lady's name was enough to unstrap the elvish rope from a tree stump, and for it to fall back cleanly into the hands of Sam at the bottom of a cliff. In another instance, when Sam and Frodo were in their lair of Shelob, a great spider, he uttered the name of Galadriel and raised the phial of Galadriel. I quote, it flamed like a star that, leaping from the firmament, sears the dark air with intolerable light. No such terror out of heaven had ever burned in Shelob's face before. The beams of it entered into her wounded head and scored it with unbearable pain, and the dreadful infection of light spread from eye to eye. End of quote. Near the end of their journey, Frodo and Sam were already spent from being in the territory of the Dark Lord for a long time. Yet even then it was the gift from Lothlorien that sustained them. I quote, the lembas had a virtue without which they would long ago have lain down to die. It did not satisfy desire, and at times Sam's mind was filled with memories of food, and the longing for simple bread and meats. Yet this waybread of the elves had a potency that increased as travelers relied on it alone, and did not mingle it with other foods. It fed the will, and it gave strength to endure, and to master sinew and limb beyond the measure of mortal kind. End of quote. Lothlorien represented a certain power that was beyond what can be seen on earth. In the novel, it was depicted as a timeless place, seemingly untouched by the events around them. Rivendell, another dwelling place of the elves, also provided respite, but it does not even come close to Lorien. I quote, in Rivendell there was memory of ancient things. In Lorien, the ancient things still lived on in the waking world. Evil had been seen and heard there. Sorrow had been known. The elves feared and distrusted the world outside. Wolves were howling on the wood's border, but on the land of Lorien no shadow lay. End of quote. Even if one had the first four key essentials, without this fifth essential, one would not be able to complete the mission or even go far. This was a source of power that one had to draw on when the going got tough. In the real world, Lothlorien could mean different things to different people. It could be a strong sense of home that one can hold on to, where one can rest, find healing, and the courage to go on. For others, it could mean a spiritual encounter that could sustain one in one's journey. Tolkien has acknowledged, after all, the Christian undercurrent of The Lord of the Rings. Yet for others it can mean a strong sense of hope that can strengthen the heart when all else tempts them to give up. This fifth essential is the one that empowers the individual to go forward in seemingly impossible circumstances, transforming ordinary people into heroes. It is also this fifth essential that provides a source of light in the midst of darkness. Even if darkness seems to have touched or overcome the land, this light, no matter how tiny it seems, can disperse such darkness. In one's journey in the modern world, the force of the modern Dark Lord may sometimes seem invincible, formidable, and overcoming, yet with the help of five key essentials, the power of the small, the gift of fellowship, the wisdom of Gandalf, knowing one's mission, and possessing the Lothlorien within, it is not impossible for one to help turn the tide in favor of goodness and light. It was, after all, with the help of the five key essentials that the tide turned in The Lord of the Rings to the utter destruction of the enemy.